The genocide of Chinese people at Nanking, also known as the Rape of Nanking by Joseph Crowder and Ahmed Salem. Before jumping into what and why this occurred, it's important to know and understand the definition of a genocide. A genocide is the deliberate killing of a large group of people, especially those of a particular ethnic group or nation. This is usually done to assert a belief in racial superiority over a group of individuals and is very similar to ethnic cleansing. The term genocide was first used by Raphael Lemkin in his book Axis Rule in Europe. Japan's preliminary conflicts with China began when China invaded the Chinese mainland during World War II. In most cases, the Imperial Japanese Army won battles, but true strategic victories eluded them, due in part to the resilience of the Chinese National Army. This resilience frustrated Japanese infantrymen, feeding into the hatred that would result in the Rape of Nanking. Following the bloody battle at Shanghai, Japanese forces turned their sights to the capital city of Nanking, whose forces had previously been evicted by order of Chinese President Chiang Kai-shek. The citizens were subsequently defenseless, allowing Japanese troops to overtake the city more easily. This lack of defenses further contributed to the genocide that would occur. The rape, as we call it, occurred in the December of 1937 and lasted for a still disputed time frame of 6 weeks. During this time, Japanese soldiers raped 20,000 to 80,000 Chinese women and killed a range of 40,000 to 300,000 Chinese citizens. Japan's destruction of the city would require decades of recovery. The slaughtered peoples consisted of residents like women, children, the elderly, and many business owners and employees that did not flee in hopes of protecting their businesses. In addition to the natives of Nanking, there were refugees, wounded soldiers, Chinese civilians outside of the city, and prisoners of war. The Japanese, in retaliation, had brought in their GSF army and mechanized forces to assist in the raising. It is important to note that the majority of the people within the city were considered non-combatants. It's time to answer the pressing question at hand. Why did the Rape of Nanking occur? There are multiple factors that contributed to the massacre, such as culture, flawed tactics that were a part of military practice, fatigue, hunger, social Darwinism, and racism. Tensions have existed between China and Japan for centuries before the start of World War II, so anti-Chinese sentiments were common in Japan. The desire to beat out the other country affected much of society, so much so that it had become ingrained in some individuals. This culture was exhibited in school-aged children, what many call social Darwinism, as only those who were the strongest or were superior should live on to reproduce. This desire to succeed often came at the expense of others, i.e. their classmates, and eventually the Chinese population at Nanking. These ideals were not only present in schools, but the military as well, which resulted in the abuses of power and the abuses of infantrymen. Violence was ingrained in military culture, desensitizing the soldiers to it. These heavy-handed tactics no doubt made many angry, but the victims of said abuses had very few ways to efficiently handle these emotions. As they had really only known abuse, they sought to satisfy their anger through it, which is what led them to brutally murder, rape, and pillage those who had once been in their shoes, the defenseless and the powerless. Adding to their anger was the lack of food and hunger that they experienced as a result of mismanagement of supplies for the military by the Japanese government. Not only were they mad at their past and their current situation, but they were also infuriated as a result of their hunger. They, for lack of better terms, were hangry. This motivation was not just intrinsic, however, and besides the external motivation caused by the hunger. According to the factsandDetails.com, who reported on the film Japanese Devils, a soldier's manhood could come into question if he were to go against or not participate in the rapes and murders. How a soldier was perceived would determine if they received certain punishments, some of which were particularly harsh, providing a greater desire to do more harm and to fit in with their peers. There were many attempts to justify Japanese expansion and the rape, which manifested itself through the statement of the Greater Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, which they sought to create to fight against European expansion. At the end of the day, the underlying reason for the rape, as previously mentioned, was a belief in Japanese racial superiority over the Chinese people. This was a continuation and construction of the social Darwinism that plagued their childhood. They killed, raped, and pillaged as a way to express and maintain their superiority. All of their actions, specifically the rape and murder, are known to be exertions of superiority over the weaker or unprepared. In truth, there is no actual way for people to determine why the Japanese soldiers treated the people at Nanking so horribly. It is one thing to simply kill an enemy, but these soldiers went out of their way to torture individuals, to rape women and children, and to put others through physical torment until they died. Racial biases seem to be the leading cause of these acts, as previously mentioned. Victims of abuse are far more likely to become abusers themselves, contributing to the idea that these men were acting out as a result of the military's culture. In addition to the fueling by racism, misogyny may have played a large role. Rape is something that is commonly committed by men as a way of subjugating women. The scale at which the rapes occur at Nanking suggests that a belief that men are superior to women was also a contributing factor. Racism coupled with misogyny is a powerful and dangerous force. As the documents that detailed what happened have been destroyed, the public will never know just how badly the conditions were. Most information that is known comes from witness reports and testimonials, clouding understanding of what truly happened. No matter what justifications and rationalizations people can think of, it's important to realize that there is no way to justify their actions. The racist views that Japan held are still present, with Japan disputing how many people were killed at the massacre. Japan asserts that only around 40,000 to up to 200,000–250,000 were killed, while Chinese officials say that 300,000 or more in total were killed. There are even cases of Japanese officials denying that the rape of Nanking ever actually occurred, as there wasn't any evidence to prove it. Rather than letting this debate and the massacre hinder the Chinese, they've used it to further nationalist and collectivist ideals in their country. They have essentially taken the power back from the Japanese. These new ideals and this greater nationalism felt by the Chinese was fueled by the failure to be held accountable for the massacre due to the previously mentioned lack of evidence, as most of it had been destroyed after Japan surrendered in 1945. Unfortunately, other countries around the world did and could do very little because of the lack of evidence. Their hands were bound, and they could do very little to help the Chinese. Almost ironically, China is guilty of the same thing that happened to them. Uyghur Muslims in China have been methodically tortured and killed by the Chinese government. In the same way that there was little evidence to definitively say what happened to the Chinese people at Nanking, the public has very little knowledge on what is and has transpired at the Uyghur internment camps. In conclusion, the Nanking Massacre was an inhumane attack against the Chinese people, furthered by the existence and continuity of racism within Japanese culture, flawed tactics that resulted in abuses of military personnel, fatigue due to the long war, and hunger as a result of mismanagement of supplies by the Japanese government. Still, Japan has done very little to make amends for their heinous acts and continues to deny the severity or truly own up to its previous mistakes. Despite this, it is incredibly important that people continue to have this conversation and to learn about the massacre at Nanking, as we cannot forget the lives of thousands of men, women, and children who died there. By failing to learn from the past, we may fall prey to making the same mistakes again in the future. We cannot allow racism, misogyny, and other views to allow us to kill other individuals. Thank you.